This is Entrepreneurs, the Playbook, and I have Reece Kurtenbach, CEO, President, and Chairman of the Board of Daktronics. And, Reece, welcome to the Playbook. I'm so excited because every technological advancement has occurred in my favorite space, which is the live event space, the space that I was born into from my early career in sports. And I am just amazed on the evolution with AI, virtual experiences, live experiences, what we can do today, and the data that's attached to what we do today is so valuable for so many people and the experiences themselves. For you, how did you get started in this business? Where was your interest early on in understanding, how and why we get involved in these types of events?
Yeah. And thanks for having us here today, David. It's a pleasure to talk about what we do. We love it as well. So that's awesome. And I've been at Daktronics for a long time. I started full time back in '91. So it's a lifetime for some folks, but we do what we do because we love it. It's big and bright and bold and out there in front of everyone. And you asked me about my history. When we started, Daktronics only did incandescent light bulbs and some reflective, and then the LED we did was red, amber. It was pretty limited because the technology was limited. But we were fortunate that in the mid '90s, the blue and the green LEDs, and then advancements in other areas of technology, allowed us to do video in these sports arenas. And you might remember the Sony Jumbotron and some of these. They were the early days of video in stadiums was a completely different technology. It was based on, what we had in our homes at the time, these deep, heavy CRT tubes. And as the LED technology kept advancing, we were able to do more with less power and less money. And so the size of the screens grew. And then they started to put them everywhere within a facility, in the bowl, and increasingly outside of the bowl, in clubs and lounges and all of that. And as you said, you've grown up in sports. The experience that you had in a stadium that was built in the '90s or the '80s was completely different. The fan amenities was almost not a thing then. If you could get a box of popcorn and maybe a beer, then that's probably all that they had going for you. And of course, the whole game day experience has changed in the last 20 years.
And it really has. And in fact, I've gone to some national championship, Super Bowls, just some great games, and I was almost disappointed because, my tickets are worth so much, and I'm sitting 50-yard line, and half the time I'm thinking, I'm looking at the screen. I could have been at home. I could have sold these tickets, and it's better above me than it is right in front of me. And then my eyes are drawn to the technologies that you've utilized. One of the other interesting things, you know, you're from South Dakota. You went to school in
Hmm.
South Dakota, not known for its technological advancements. It's not Sand Hill Road in the Silicon Valley. Although football wise, I think they hold their own by far,
Yeah,
especially
yeah.
quarterback wise, and the loyalty towards it. But I mean, you were a student employee at Daktronics. You've been there since the early '80s, and you've stayed with not only the same company but the evolution all the way to be the CEO and chairman of this company here. That's probably the rarest thing that I've seen on the playbook. Uh, it was very common in the old days, but nowadays, when someone has that type of success from a smaller town, they usually find some way to leave, and yet you stuck with it. And what do you attribute to the fact that you've been able to? I'm doing the math in my head, is almost 40 years in a technology company to stay with the same company from student into chairman.
Yeah, it's um, mm, in South Dakota, and I think many small communities have this. You have ties inside of work and outside of work, and maybe with COVID and all the remote work, things begin to change. but really we have deep roots within South Dakota. We have tight ties with the local university. Our two founders came from the local university and founded Daktronics 50 some years ago. And as we got bigger, we did grow outside the community. So Brookings is one community we're in. Sioux Falls is another that's close by. Redwood Falls. We've opened manufacturing in those different areas. We started to expand throughout the U.S., placing sales and service people within different parts of the U.S. And as we started to go more international, as we explored that in the mid-aughts, we started that same model. We placed people in a country or in a continent on a sales and service role, and we just grew with that. And so even though I've been with this same company, every few years, what we're doing and what I'm doing personally changes. So it seems like I've been constantly doing different things. I started as a engineer, project manager. I started to then manage an engineering team, this team that developed our full color video sorts of displays. Ran certain parts of the business before our previous CEO, Jim Morgan, retired in 2013. And so that was, kind of my personal story. But it's not unusual within Daktronics. There's many people at Daktronics that have a long tenure compared to certainly technology companies. But even to me, I'm not the oldest or the longest tenured employee there. And so it sounds interesting or it sounds unusual, but in our organization, it's relatively common.
And within that context of people staying there a long time, it usually means there's strict sense of at least corporate culture and company values. How has the company values evolved, from a small LED company in the 80s and 90s, to kind of more of an engineering and display company to a worldwide company now? How have the values and culture changed? Even though you're a small town company, you're a pretty big company and you hire people all around the world. So, how have the values changed and evolved since you first started as a student?
Yeah, I think it's relatively portable across countries and culture. My father was one of the co-founders, Al Kurtenbach, and his the values that he started with was honesty, helpfulness, and humility. That let's not be too big to go and help our friends and coworkers through the organization. Let's try to be visible and transparent and minimize the friction sometimes happen when you have people. They might talk about politics and political sorts of perspectives. So how can we minimize that through our core values? And as we've gone to different parts of the world and brought on employees in Europe and Asia and the Middle East and elsewhere, those things translate and work well across all of that. So I think it's we have a respect for the people that work for Daktronics. We have a good set of core values, and then we try to live those and promote those throughout the organization.
And one of those values, especially in the forefront during COVID, is prioritizing safety.
Yeah.
And it seems to be throughout your culture and history, very important in a prioritization for the company. Um, how has that changed too, especially with COVID and the international aspect of, a couple thousand employees or more that you have? How have you been able to, prioritize safety, but yet I think have your best year ever in increased growth at Daktronics while you're still making sure everybody's safe?
Yeah, it was a hard year. I don't um maybe one pandemic's enough in my career, but we'll see
In
how
your
that plays
lifetime,
out.
forget your
Yeah,
career.
yeah,
Yeah, that's
yeah, in
enough in
my
my
life.
lifetime, and I'm gonna live a long time. So let's keep us all safe.
Um, and it was a hard year for us. We did retract, our revenue and orders went down for the year, but we think that with the vaccinations and how they're being distributed, that the future's bright. But the early days of the pandemic, you're right. Nobody knew. It came at all of us fast. You had to react and make decisions. So our management team was meeting weekly before the pandemic. We started to meet daily as what was happening became apparent, and we would have things that would spring up. You might remember the UK was one of the earlier hotspots, and we had people in Ireland. We have a factory running in Ireland. We have a factory and a whole team that's in Shanghai, China, and that was early days there as well. And each one we learned, and as we reacted and tried different things. And so by the time we got to the US and our factories, we basically sent, if you could work from home, you worked from home. If you worked in a factory, we had followed the CDC guidelines and the other advice that was out there, safety precautions, grouped people into smaller pods, made sure that we did contact tracing. And then we took those same sorts of procedures out into the field when business was still happening. So we had people showing up at customer sites, working with them, and masks, cleaning. I think we all learned the value of lotion as our hands dried out with all of this, alcohol stuff. And so you kind of learned all of that stuff during this, and then reinforcing it and just letting people know that it's about safety first. And if you have a concern, bring that up and let's talk about it and let's figure it out. Don't just, I guess I don't know, I'm supposed to do this, and dive in without thinking first. And we've been, within Daktronics, our walls, we've been relatively free from any sort of transmission. We have people that did test positive, they would quarantine and then come back, like many of us had, but no real incidents where we did a lot of transmission within the facility. So we feel fortunate that we went through it in the way we were.
Yeah, and you'll benefit in the long term. And speaking of long term vision, I always say that time itself has its own reciprocity of situational knowledge. So those people that have been, at a company for 40 years have a greater capability of having a 40-year vision than the millennial that's been there 4 months trying to tell you the 40-year vision. I believe there is an equated reciprocity between the type of long-term experience in an industry and the vision that we can have. For you, you probably have had the most experience in this industry of anyone that I've known, except for the other people that have worked there longer than you, but I don't know them. I was wondering what your long-term vision is, utilizing my philosophy of reciprocity of time and knowledge in that space. Because if somebody would have told me that there'd be a display that was worth more than the stadium that I grew up in, I would have said, come on, that's impossible. But yet we see it all the time. Displays are more expensive than entire stadiums were, 30 years ago. That vision is one in which you can see better than I can a long-term technological and business opportunity that we may not be aware of. Where do you see the industry going long-term?
Yeah, of course, there's sports, and then there's really, we call it commercial, on-premise or third-party advertising, and then we have our transportation business. And there's others that are coming up, because I think the future is static imaging and static displays are going to be less and less popular, and that things that move and interact and change are going to become more expected by whoever it may be. There's as you're talking about this generational difference. I respect that the people born in the 90s and the 2000s, the aughts, had a different experience than maybe myself in the 60s or 70s or 50s, whatever it is. On the other hand, I think since the dawn of humankind, the older generations looked at the younger generation and said, geez, I don't know if they know what they're doing. We might be doomed as a race, right? So I think both of those things are at play, and how do you balance all that out? But I think we're going to see increasingly digital everywhere. If you look at what you described in the stadium, it's reflected in my living room. My TV, when I graduated college, I think I had a 19-inch color TV that, was huge and heavy. It was a console. Remember those things that would spin
I
on the
remember.
base? Yeah. And now I've got a nice OLED TV, I suppose 60, 65-inch. And that's what we're used to at home. And so we expect something similar when we go to a stadium. And I tell you, the professional stadiums that we were talking about early on in this conversation, you're getting that at the high school level now. Those stadiums are probably what as nice as what we experienced at a professional level. Maybe not quite the capacity, but everything else is as nice. And of course, the new stadiums going up are works of art. I mean, architecturally and all of the systems that they're putting in there to engage the fan. The fan experience is engineered now. You could talk from the street to the seats, but as they get ready to come to their game day, they're getting excited. Every step of the way should reinforce that excitement and get them hyped up for the game, and at the same time make it easier. Where am I supposed to go? What's happening? And so what a modern or a high tech team is able to do today is really build in this innate emotional part of, I think it's the human need. We want to be with others. I don't know about you, but I missed people as we went through this pandemic. I've done a lot of this screen time, and it's good. It's better than just talking on the phone, but it's not the same as being with people and in person. So you talked about being at the game and watching it, maybe watching the screens. That's what it's supposed to be. It's supportive of what's happening on the field, but it doesn't replace sitting in your living room, maybe texting your buddies about, oh, did you see that play? That's still fun. It still happens, but it's not the same as that in-game experience. And so I think we're going to continue to see people go to events. We want to be around others. We want to see these types of things, and digital displays are there to support it. And you're going to see even more of them, more places, bigger, higher res, all kinds of cool things.
Yeah, there's better screens in the bathrooms in some of these stadiums than it used to be out on the field. And that connectivity during the game, and you and I are both old enough to remember not wanting to get something to eat, not wanting to go to the bathroom because we didn't want to miss any of
Yeah,
the
yeah,
game. And now
yeah.
that's not an issue at all as well. Now, topping over $500 million in sales, what is your focus moving forward for the next few years?
Yeah, we certainly have a lot of really good core markets, the sports business, a lot of live events business, a lot of out of home advertising, a lot of on premise work. And we're continuing to invest in that business. But this there's new technologies that fit into this whole big category called narrow pixel pitch. So these big stadiums, the distance from one grouping of LEDs to another was maybe 20 millimeters or 25 millimeters, an inch or two. And now these narrow pixel pitches are measured at 2 millimeters and below. So like a tenth of an inch is the distance between. And so within a relatively small screen, you can get HD resolutions, and it's bold and it's bright. And we can scale these up to be any size. So you're seeing these not only in the clubs and lounges around a sports stadium, you're seeing these in lobbies, corporate lobbies, you're seeing them in meeting rooms, large auditoriums, hanging, if you go to, remember when we went to the airport, hanging from the ceiling and showing advertising within airports. This stuff is going to be everywhere because it's lightweight, it's bright, it's high quality, high image quality, and it's cool. So I think we're going to continue to see more and more of that. And so you'll see us spread outside some of these core markets into some of these other areas where the technology advancements are really leveraging us into these new sorts of applications.
Yeah, and you're doing a tremendous job. And in the media world, we call your business the amplification business. You take that content that's captured and amplify it in the best experience possible. And sometimes, as I mentioned earlier, Daktronics makes the experience too good. You don't even watch the real thing because it's so good. So I certainly appreciate what you're doing in home, out of home, streets to seats. Everywhere we know where the digital movement is going, and it looks bright. Of course, no pun intended, for Reece Kurtenbach, CEO, President, and Chairman of the board of Daktronics. Thank you so much for giving your long history and playbooks of success. I think you may be in the Hall of Fame for the longest tenure today at a company, at least from a small city. So thank you so much for being so dedicated, not just to your company, but of course your community. I know you've made a great difference in that community and all communities now around the world. So we appreciate you. Thank you so much.